In 1772, Alice Walker was a 19-year-old woman and accused of stealing 12 pounds and a purse in London. She was sentenced to transportation, which meant that she would have to spend 7 years as a convict servant in the Americas. She was sent on a ship, which was a notoriously brutal ship, that by some accounts, by the time that the passengers arrived in the Americas, it was a 6 to 8 week journey, they had been reduced to drinking their urine because the captain didn't provide enough water on the trip. Alice was sold to a prestigious family, plantation holding family in the Virginias, and the following year, in 1773, she escaped. Now, she wasn't alone. This family had previously lost some enslaved Africans who had escaped, and escaping with Alice Walker were three other white convict laborers. So one of the things that's so interesting about this period is that in the plantations in the Americas, you had enslaved African Americans working alongside enslaved white convict servants. There were a lot of posters put up around Virginia for Alice's and her comrades' return. They weren't apprehended, though, until a year later in 1774, when she was arrested in London and put on trial for escaping her sentence of transportation. This time, the sentence was death. She was found guilty and would have been executed, but the jury recommended mercy, and so the judge sentenced her instead to transportation again, and she was sent back to the Americas for 14 years this time. And at this point, we lose track of Alice Walker and her further doings. To learn more about transportation to the Americas, please read the selection from this book. And to read what happens after the advent of the American Revolution, when it's no longer possible for British courts to sentence people to transportation, read the selection from the website that's also on the syllabus. It explains the development of the Hulk system, whereby British ships, old, abandoned, pretty derelict British ships, are used to house folks who would otherwise be sentenced to transportation, and they're put to work on spots throughout England. Response papers, a few things. First, don't focus on transportation in your response papers, because there isn't enough in the readings that you have about the physical environment of response papers. Instead, focus on hulks. But in the historical section of your response papers, address transportation, because transportation is a historical backdrop to the development of the hulks. So you'll want to address the fact that banishment had been a response to criminal wrongdoing since the early days, the Transportation Act of 1717, which allowed courts to directly sentence somebody to transportation, and then the outbreak of the American Revolution, and how, with the cessation of commercial activities between the American colonies and England, hulks were developed as a way to meet some of the same ends and to address the problem of growing numbers of people who were awaiting transportation and not knowing what to do with them. Also, when you talk about the history in your response papers, don't forget what we have already covered in class, which is to say urbanization, rising levels of poverty within English cities, a sense on the part of the dominant classes that people needed to be controlled, especially the poorer classes needed to be controlled, and a growing antipathy towards the use of capital punishment as a means of social control. Finally, with the response papers, there are some wonderful images in the on the website in particular of hulks. Those images are data for you. Please look at them closely, and when you're physically describing the hulks, rely on the information in those three drawings to answer the question about the size, form, materials, conditions of the hulks that existed in England in the 18th century. In class on Monday, we're going to resume our discussion of Newgate Prison. So please review that so we can have a good discussion about that. And I am hoping that by the time Monday's finished, before the end of class on Monday, we'll have shifted our attention to hulks and transportation. In any case, the response paper on hoax and transportation will be due on Wednesday morning as usual. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.